Hello everyone, and welcome to the Biblical Bookworm. My name is Elizabeth, and today I'll be talking about the book Pope Peter, Defending the Church's Most Distinctive Doctrine in a Time of Crisis. The book was published in 2020 by Dr. Joe Heschmeyer, who is a staff apologist for Catholic Answers. Before working for Catholic Answers, he practiced as an attorney, and so he has a doctorate in law. I first heard about him in the book when I stumbled upon a video with Matt Fred where they were discussing what a bad pope means for the church, and as the book sounded really intriguing, I decided to read it. To give you an idea of what exactly the book is about, I'll start with a quote from the book. "The church right now is going through a period of crisis, at least in part because of bad papal and episcopal leadership. The household of God, which is the church of the living God, is going through the roughest patch it's seen in centuries. Pretending otherwise is dishonest, and it sets non-Catholics up for disappointment. Not every pope or bishop lives up to his calling, just as not every parent does. But the truth is, as with the sacrament of matrimony, the papal structure of the church is founded by Jesus Christ. It exists for the good of his people, and it is better than any alternative." So you see, the book is not an abstract treatise on the hypothetical case that there might be a bad pope one day, but it actually starts with specific examples where Pope Francis said things that are rather difficult to harmonize with what the Catholic Church has always taught. So after the introduction to the Pope Francis problem, Dr. Heschmeyer explains what the papacy is, what it's not, what reasons we have to believe that it has been instituted by Christ, and the scope of papal infallibility. He uses the current confusion around the Pope to explain the Catholic understanding of the papacy, and by doing so he creates a book that is informative and useful regardless of the current papal leadership, which I think makes it particularly valuable. It's important to point out that the papacy is the most distinctive doctrine of the Catholic Church. As Dr. Heschmeyer explains, this doesn't mean that the papacy is the most important doctrine of the Catholic Church, because of course the fact that God exists or that Jesus is God are way more important teachings. But when deciding if the Catholic faith is the true one and comparing it to other Christian denominations, the question to answer is whether the papacy is true or not. Because if you compare different Christian denominations, they all have some doctrinal differences, but what makes the Catholic faith unique is its hierarchical structure, with the Pope on top of that hierarchy, who has the authority to teach infallibly under certain circumstances. The author elaborates that the question is not, do I agree with what the Catholic Church teaches, but the question is, what is the Catholic Church? He compares this to the situation where a person decides what to think of Jesus and his teachings, because here the question is not, do you agree with everything that Jesus taught, but the question is, who is Jesus? C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity put it this way: "You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to." So either the Catholic Church is what she claims to be, namely divinely instituted by Christ, with the authority to teach infallibly, in which case we can trust the Church even if she contradicts our personal reading of Scripture, but if she's not what she claims to be, then we have no reason to treat her with any particular respect. To quote Dr. Heschmeyer, "Behind the question of both Jesus' identity and the Church, there is a question of what it means to believe. We are not called to blind faith, but rather, in the famous words of the 11th century theologian St. Anselm, faith seeking understanding. But there's a world of difference between faith seeking understanding and faith contingent upon understanding, which is no faith at all. If I believe where I agree and deny where I disagree, the only I believe is myself." As he states in another passage, "It's when we disagree that we see how much or how little respect for authority we have." I'll summarize some of the chapters now that I found most interesting. As most of you probably know, the Bible passage that is usually used to show that Christ instituted the papacy is Matthew 16:17-19, where Jesus says, "Jesus replied, 'Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I'll tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven.' And here I won't dive into the reasons the author presents to believe that Jesus refers to Peter as the rock on which the church is built and not himself, because what I found more interesting here is a wordplay in the Greek text. So as I've just said, Peter is referred to as the rock on which Christ built his church, so basically the foundation. But a few verses later, when Peter rebukes Jesus in Matthew 16:23, Jesus calls him scandalon, which in Greek means stumbling stone. This means that Peter is both the rock upon which Jesus built the church, and at the same time the rock or stone that causes the faithful to stumble. We have to keep in mind that Peter was both Peter the rock and Peter the denier of Christ. This shows that God chose to work through Peter despite knowing that Peter will also be the stumbling stone for the faithful. As Dr. Heschmeyer explains, Jesus doesn't promise that the popes will always be holy or brilliant. So papal infallibility doesn't mean that the pope will always be a good person or a saint. It means that believers will never have to choose between membership in the visible Catholic Church and fidelity to the gospel. We'll never have to choose between schism or heresy. The author also explains that the Pope is only infallible when he teaches ex cathedra. So that means when he teaches something that we as Catholics have to believe, then we know it's ex cathedra. This in turn means that when the Pope says something casually in an interview, he does not teach infallibly. Dr. Heschmeyer points out that Christ demands church unity, as in one of his final prayers before his passion, he prays for unity. That's John 17:20-23. I do not pray for these only, but also for those who believe in me through their word, that they may all be one, even as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that thou hast sent me. The glory which thou hast given me I have given to them, that they may be one, even as we are one, I in them and thou in me, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that thou hast sent me, and hast loved them, even as thou hast loved me. According to the author, this prayer is the only one explicitly prayed for the people who came to believe through the testimony of the apostles. And what's worth noting here is that the only thing Jesus prays for is unity. And by praying that we may be one so that the world may know that thou hast sent me and hast loved them even as thou hast loved me, Jesus shows that this unity is not optional, but a necessary condition for the success of the Great Commission. But Christ also demands truth, and so the author argues that the only way to make this work, so to have truth and unity at the same time, is through an infallible authority. Without that, it's always necessary to choose between truth and unity, as we can see with Christian denominations, who all believe different versions of the Christian faith in the pursuit of truth, but therefore they have to compromise on unity. In Dr. Heschmeyer's words, without infallibility, we can therefore never have a lasting unity in truth. Yet that's precisely what Christ calls us to, and what the New Testament presupposes. So infallibility doesn't render the New Testament superfluous. It makes the New Testament model of truth and unity workable. Dr. Heschmeyer compares the hierarchical structure of the church to biblical marriage. Because in marriage, biblically, the husband is the head of the household and the wife is called to submit to the husband. And at the same time, the husband is called to love the wife as Christ loves the church. The reason why this construction is necessary is because spouses won't always agree, and so it's necessary that one of them has a casting vote. This design for a healthy marriage is similar to what a healthy nation or a healthy kingdom is supposed to look like, and it's also God's design for a healthy church. The author argues that just as it would be unreasonable to expect that every marriage lives out that design perfectly, so it's unreasonable to expect that the church lives out that design perfectly. And here Dr. Heschmeyer writes what I quoted at the very beginning of this video, so he explains that this divinely instituted church is better than any alternative. Here I'd like to quote Hilaire Belloc, who said that the Catholic Church is an institution I am bound to hold divine. But for unbelievers, a proof of its divinity might be found in the fact that no merely human institution conducted with such knavish imbecility would have lasted a fortnight. Now let's get to my opinion on the book. What makes this book shine is that it combines the clarity of C.S. Lewis with the abundance of sources of St. Alphonsus, with a similar structure of reasoning as St. Thomas, which are great authors to imitate. And also the decisiveness with which he addresses the issue of the crisis in the church is something I give him bonus points for, because he definitely is not beating around the bush when he explicitly quotes problematic statements of Pope Francis and calls bad papal leadership one of the causes of the current crisis in the church. In this regard, the book is similar to Made by Love by Father Mike Schmitz, because both authors chose very challenging and sensitive topics in their books, which I highly appreciate. Another positive thing about the book that I'd like to highlight is the occasional humor. For example, I love that the book is dedicated to Paul and Barbara Heschmeyer for raising me to be a shameless papist. That's pure gold in my opinion. Now, regarding the rating of the book, I've been reflecting for a while on whether I like the fact that his introductory chapter is so closely tied to the current crisis, but then the main part of the book is just general apologetics for the papacy. And my final opinion is that this was an excellent choice to write the book like that, because that way it stays relevant even if someone were to read it in 400 years. And so the content of the book is relevant to confused Catholics today. It's also relevant to Protestants because the author refutes a ton of Protestant objections in the book. And it's also just very interesting in general for anyone who wants to understand the Catholic teaching about the papacy. I think it's needless to say that this book is a 10 out of 10. That's been it for today. I hope you liked the video. See you next week. God bless and bye!